Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. So this is going to, of course, continue my reread of the entire Cosmere in anticipation of Stormlight Archive number 5 coming in December. So today we're going to talk about The Way of Kings from the perspective of the way in which Brandon kind of just like goes full hog into the world building and making it a completely different type of world as compared to Missborne. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about the plot and stuff like that. But for the most part, we're going to keep it to the idea of the world building and the way Brandon kind of made it a no holds barred kind of book. So yeah, with that being said, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and please make sure you check out the Patreon if you're interested in supporting the channel in that way. The description is, or the link is in the description. So as always, let's begin. All right, so Way of Kings. So let's compare it immediately to like not Wheel of Time, to Mistborn. So Mistborn is really cool in that it does take place on a totally different planet other than Earth. It's not just like a medieval type of fantasy. So it's kind of similar to medieval because it's pretty much in that timeline, but it's in on a different planet in a different society and that kind of stuff. So the world building is fairly vast and it's fairly interesting, and it's a huge distinction from Earth. So it's really, really cool. But it's kind of like a subtle distinction from Earth. It's not a dramatic difference. So for people who aren't used to reading epic fantasy with intense world building and complete, major differences and stuff, like it's a great gateway book. So it's perfect for anyone who's like not used to a story with just high in depth world building. So it's just like less of a leap. But then when you get to Stormlight, that leap is larger. So that's why oftentimes most people, including myself, will recommend people start with something like Mistborn before going into Stormlight, because the world building and the lack of hand holding in terms of terms and like different kind of ways of speaking about different things that are typically common in fantasy, it just takes a different level. It steps it up to a completely different level in Way of Kings. So I've had multiple people listen to the prologue, just the part where they're kind of giving up their honor blades and kind of, doing that whole scene. And very few people have been able to totally understand what was being said. Like the story just completely starts off with like no hand holding and just like, all right, we're hitting the ground running. This is, a random planet. We got these summoning swords and we got crazy blood colors and stuff. Like it just starts and it just goes. So it's just kind of interesting that it like has zero hand holding and stuff. It's kind of like, it's, in my opinion, it's very much like the fantasy, like classic fantasy that would just be completely comparable to Earth. And so for that reason, I really enjoy it. But it's really interesting to me to how many people, it's too dense. Like they just can't really get into it because it's too unfamiliar. So I kind of like the fact that Brandon leaves that element of unfamiliarity into the world building and stuff, because of course that allows us to discover everything about the world along with the characters. So he manages to have multiple characters who have limited experience exploring their own world. So when they actually do kind of go out and go into the world and the plot started to really pick up, then you can kind of start to learn about the world in an organic way. It's not somebody just standing off to the side expositing about the nature of the flora and the fauna and everything, but we're learning about it in an organic way. So that's why I really love the inclusion of a character like Shallan. Shallan is a character who's an artist, but she's also a huge natural history buff. So she loves nature and, plants and animals and all that kind of stuff. So whenever she's traveling around and stuff, when she's making her way through the story and her plot line, she's constantly observing the different plants and the animals and all this kind of stuff. So by virtue of her studying these things, being a natural historian, we get to learn about them and like understand the world that the story takes place in. And it's done in a very organic and understandable way. And I just really, really like that element. Like that's actually a fairly difficult element to include, because a lot of times it can come off as just pure exposition and like having a character like talk at you and just overly explain everything to you. So I just really like the way in which Brandon was able to incorporate that into The Way of Kings. But you do actually kind of have to get into it a little bit before you hit that point, because it does start off really, really dense. And even with a character like Kaladin is not a natural historian or anything like that. He's essentially vacillating between being a surgeon and being a soldier, But even him, he, grew up in a small town in a remote part of the country and stuff. So when he starts moving around and starts, going on his journeys and stuff, making his way to the Shattered Plains, he starts to notice different things about the world and animals and stuff. So like he even makes observations that help teach the reader about the world and everything. And of course about the magic systems and stuff. Brandon does this thing in the prologue where he has someone just full out uses the magic system in a way that no one else does for the rest of the book. So we have an interesting foundational understanding of how the magic will work, even though we don't have another character apart from that one character who's actually actively using the magic in a full out way yet. So that way we're able to learn about the fundamentals of the magic that one of our other characters is going to use before he actually discovers that he has that power set. So for most people, it becomes pretty apparent when you see what Zeth is doing and all this kind of stuff. They're like, okay, Kaladin is going to have those same type of powers, especially when he starts to exhibit some ability and stuff. So I just really like the way in which it all plays together. Like Brandon kind of thinks about it from both ends of the spectrum. So he kind of does it in this subtle kind of telling you about it way, this kind of subtle introduction kind of way, and then allows the character's plot and the exposition that naturally comes forth from them moving through the world to kind of explain the rest to you. So it's interesting in that people consider it quite dense, but I think the way he constructs it almost has this perfect kind of subtle hand-holding effect to it. So it's just really, really fun, the kind of contradiction of the nature of it. Because some people have completely opted out of Stormlight and the Cosmere entirely because they started with Way of Kings and it just didn't make any sense to them. It just was too confusing and too dense, and then they kind of allowed that to color their entire opinion of all Brandon's works. So it's similar to how some people will see some of his romantic storylines will be pretty subpar, and then they're like, okay, well, he's just not good at all, and allow it to color their entire opinion. So I think it's kind of one of those interesting situations where like many people have discovered the enjoyment of Brandon's work, of course, but there's a lot of people who have basically opted out of it because it's not as handholdy as some other fantasy books are. So I don't know, that it makes it feel a little exclusive in a way, I guess. Like if you have the patience and the interest and the curiosity to just keep going and digging into this unknown crazy world building, then you'll be rewarded. Like we're coming up on book 5 and I feel incredibly rewarded. Even though some of the books in the series hasn't been as good as others, I still enjoy the overall plot and the world and the magic and the exploration of all of it. So not only does Brandon have multiple characters through which he can kind of explain the world and the world building through, but the plot itself is that type of story. So the plot itself that's happening in the story is one of magic returning to the world, one of magic having been gone dormant, and a lot of things from the past are kind of creeping back into the present reality. So as a result, we learn a lot about the past of the world, and we learn about the nature of the magic of the world and like how a lot of it works. So it's not only that we have these characters that are ignorant of stuff, we not only have these new experiences that allows us to learn about this stuff, but we also have an entire plot that's dedicated to learning about all this stuff. So that's why a lot of people will classify Stormlight as the world building series, because it is world building and it's magic system crafting, and it's like a really, really good plot all the way through it. But you can tell it was a great emphasis on the exposition that was needed to explain the world and the magic, at least in these early books. As we get to around book 3, there's less of that kind of hand-holding, but we do continue to learn more because the characters, of course, learn to, start to learn more about their magic and the different limitations and the various types of magic and everything. So we never really stop learning about the world and the magic and all that stuff, but it becomes a lot less hand-holdy and a lot less necessary to kind of just slowly walk you through a lot of these things as the series progresses. So while experiencing this book on the reread, I think it's really interesting because typically I don't like rereading Way of Kings, at least not all of it, because a lot of Kaladin's backstory kind of comes off as a little boring to me upon a reread, because we've retread it so many times and I'm so used to it, so just re-experiencing it again is just not that much fun, because it also reminds me of like the core reasoning for his depression and stuff, which is just always kind of a downer. But this time on reread, I really managed to enjoy the way in which like everything kind of comes together. Like In my memory, like in hindsight, I think Kaladin is a lot more whiny and stuff like that, and I think Lyran is a lot more mean and kind of judgmental early on. But upon this reread, I realized that that's a lot of my other opinions, like going forward, coloring my opinion of the early stuff, because it's not nearly that bad. Like Kaladin's, even his, his highly depressive state where he's very maudlin and that kind of stuff, and like very sad and like despondent and that kind of stuff. Like that doesn't even last as long as I remember it in my head. It just kind of happens for a little bit, but it's done in such a way where it's like he's not, oh, suddenly he's working with Bridge 4 and like his depression is fixed. It's like it's nothing like that, which I really appreciate because it shows that that's not something that can just, be fixed in a blink or anything like that. So that's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. And just again, as I said, the whininess and just the sadness and stuff like that, it's not nearly as prevalent as I, thought about in my head as, the way when I was just recalling the idea of the book. So it's really interesting, like the way in which some of the other stuff colors it. I guess it's like the sympathy magnifies it in my memory, maybe. I don't know. But even the stuff with Shallan, even though we didn't get a whole lot of stuff with her, I really, really enjoyed that. Even though, again, I am very much a fan of sequels. Like, I like when everything is established and we're, like, hitting the ground running and using the magic. But a lot of the learning stuff, a lot of the coming up on the information and, like, the little hints and stuff that are in the not epilogues, all the hints and stuff that are in the interludes and everything like that, that's just a lot of fun to pick through again. And then with greater context and stuff like Dragonsteel context and everything, some of the stuff that's said in those letters are like hit home even harder, like because they're making references to deep lore and deep history to these characters and stuff. So that's a lot of fun. I just really enjoy all of that kind of stuff. And I think Way of Kings is a really, really good first book and a really good series. I mean, granted, the series isn't complete, so it's hard to say that the series itself is great, but so far what we've gotten from the series, it's a lot of fun. It's really enjoyable. And this is going to be a really interesting recap on all of it going up to Stormlight 5, so we can get a full comprehensive picture of this part 1 of Stormlight Archive. I'm really, really looking forward to that. So, of course, after Stormlight 5 comes out, probably sometime in 2025, I'll make a video talking about the entire part 1 of the Stormlight Archives. So that's going to be fun. Look forward to that. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say about The Way of Kings. I think it's a really interesting book that like holds no hands in terms of world building and exposition. It just goes full weird immediately right off rip, and it's just so much fun for that. It gives you a lot of like areas to look under, to explore, a lot of nooks and crannies, a lot of questions, a lot of speculation. It allows for the enjoyment of it to go well beyond the books and well beyond any number of reads, so you can kind of continuously dig through the history and lore of the world itself and just forever enjoy it. It's just so much fun. At some point we will have all the answers and all the questions will be answered, but I probably will be in my 70s by then, so I'm just going to enjoy the ride as we get it. So yeah, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and if you're interested in supporting the channel in another way, you can check out the Patreon. The link is in the description. And as always, I will talk to y'all next time. Peace.